This is the third webinar. It's part of the summer webinar series that we have organized together between the Cost Action on Wearable Robots and the EUROBENCH Project. As you know, wearable robots are already very introduced in our lives and in the market. And these 4 webinars are aimed to introduce, to tackle, to talk about some of the most crucial aspects of their introduction in the society and in our lives. The first webinar were on educational wearable robots. The second one that was held on July was on occupational exoskeletons. And this webinar we will talk about medical systems. We will have 3 important speakers. I'm sorry, I have to introduce you to them, but I do not have. Okay. So first of all, we will have with us Noël Keijsers, that is a senior researcher at Sint Maartenskliniek. Sorry for my pronunciation. He will talk about wearable robots for people with a spinal cord injury. Afterwards, we will talk about measuring exoskeletons performance. Okay, so different measuring systems that can be combined to benchmark, to test the exoskeletons performance. And we will also talk that it is, I think it is a very important item and is a relevant barrier for the introduction of exoskeletons and wearable robots in the market, about the process of clinical trials. Okay, we will have Jean-Louis Constanza, that is Chief Business and Clinical Officer at Wandercraft. And sorry for the second speech, we will have also with us Matteo Lancini of the University of Brescia, that has also collaborated with the EUROBENCH Project for the creation of a unified framework for benchmarking bipedal robots. So from me, that's all. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience. I would have been glad to have Jan Beneman introducing the session, but I think we can start. So please, Noël.
Yeah, thank you. I will try to share my screen. And hopefully this works right now.
Yes, we can start. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And good morning from Molenhoek, which is a small place in the Netherlands nearby Nijmegen. And I first would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present our work regarding wearable exoskeletons for people with a spinal cord injury. The left picture is our hospital, and the middle picture is a picture we took after the inclusion of the 25th person with a complete spinal cord in our wearable exoskeleton study. Most work was performed by Rosanne, she's here, Rosanne van Dijsseldonk, and she successfully defended her PhD in May of this year on this topic. And on the picture are also the physiotherapists Henny Rijke, Jacques van Eupen, Seberil, and Patrick Komen, who were the physiotherapists responsible for the training of the participants. And last but not least is the rehabilitation physician Ilse van Es, and she was one of the initiators for using exoskeleton for people with spinal cord injury. This picture shows Ruben Dessin, who has a complete spinal cord injury, and Ruben was the first person who trained in our hospital to use an exoskeleton. After a training period, he was able to walk independently with an exoskeleton, and he was so excited about it that he had also experienced several health benefits due to walking in the exoskeleton. Unfortunately, exoskeletons are not covered by the health insurance in the Netherlands. Therefore, he started a fundraising, and within a week, he raised enough money to buy his own exoskeleton. Based on this positive experience, we became more enthusiastic about wearable exoskeletons for people with a complete spinal cord. Therefore, we started a research project in which we offered more people with a spinal cord injury the opportunity to experience the possibilities of wearable exoskeletons. Today, I will share the knowledge we gained within this research project based on the technology acceptance model, which is shown on the next slide. For the implementation and use of technology in rehabilitation, it is important that the technology is accepted by the users. There are several models that are intended to understand the degree of technology acceptance by a group of people by means of revealing the potentialities and limitations of a specific technology. None of these models is fully suitable for wearable exoskeletons, and we have chosen the commonly used technology acceptance model, TAM, developed by Davis and later refined by Venkatesh and Davis. The TAM is one of the most commonly used models for explaining and predicting the use of technology. It describes the perceived usefulness and the perceived ease of use as the main factors influencing the attitude towards using a technology, so it's kind of the behavioral intention, and therefore the actual use, as shown on the slide. It was originally developed to explain computer usage, and it's still most widely used to explain the use of information systems such as Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. But since similar factors are involved in acceptance of rehabilitation technology in a clinical, societal, or domestic environment, we have chosen this model. With the term perceived usefulness, Davis referred to the degree to which an individual believes that using a particular system would enhance his or her job performance. With perceived ease of use, the degree of which a person believes that using a particular system would be free of effort. Therefore, the TAM seems to be a suitable model to describe the acceptance of wearable exoskeletons in people with spinal cord injury. Several adjustments are made on the model. And between behavioral intention and actual system use, Thomson introduced the factor facilitating conditions. With the term facilitating conditions, Thomson referred to objective factors in the environment that observers agree make an act easy to accomplish. One of these are facilitating conditions which interact with the behavioral intention on the final actual use. And of course, these are also important for wearable exoskeletons. For the wearable exoskeletons, we added another box, which is the intended use of wearable exoskeletons. This intended use can be different between users and play an important role in the design of the exoskeleton and, of course, the perceived usefulness and ease of use of the users. The first intended use of a wearable exoskeleton is a gait retraining. But this is for people with a spinal cord injury with the prospect of functional recovery. This will be in the semi-acute phase after the injury and provided in a specialized hospital. The use of wearable exoskeletons for gait retraining originates from the rehabilitation interventions with robot-assisted gait trainers such as the well-known Locomat. These robot-assisted gait trainers can be seen as a stationary exoskeleton, which are mostly used in combination with a treadmill and sometimes body weight support. Such robot-assisted gait retraining has been widely used in the late 90s, and a review concluded that robot-assisted gait training leads to improvements in walking distance, strength, speed, and balance in people with complete spinal cord injury. An important requirement for such exoskeletons to be useful is that guidance of the walking pattern can be adjusted. The observed improvements in walking capacity seems to indicate the efficacy of exoskeleton-based gait retraining. Indeed, several studies have shown that people with complete spinal cord injury can improve their walking speed and walking distance through exoskeleton training. However, wearable exoskeletons are in competition with robot-assisted gait trainers. Although wearable exoskeletons are cheaper, robot-assisted gait trainers have by far more functionality at the moment and are preferred by most clinicians for gait retraining. People with complete spinal cord injury who are in a chronic phase without the prospect of functional recovery have other intentions to use a wearable exoskeleton. The first one is exercise. They primarily use the exoskeleton to remain physically active and to pursue health benefits. Indeed, the results of a survey among 481 stakeholders support the high perceived usefulness of an exoskeleton for enhancing health benefits. Second one is social interaction. Users reported the importance of upright communication at eye level, which was facilitated by exoskeleton use. In addition, after exoskeleton use with a gym-based community setting, participants reported psychosocial benefits such as improved mental well-being and increased energy to socially interact at eye level. Lastly, and mostly known in the intended use is a functional assistive device. This type of intended use refers to an exoskeleton as an assistive mobility device with the ultimate goal of replacing a wheelchair during activities of daily life. The reason that we became interested in our rehabilitation clinic was when the first commercial available exoskeleton had a CE mark for home and community use. Because we had a local mod in our rehabilitation center, we purchased the ReWalk exoskeleton. For the acceptance of the wearable exoskeleton, I will focus on the intended use in the home and community setting, and I will first start with the external variables. For the exoskeleton, this is in addition to the system characteristics, of course, the training. Training is an important step for exoskeleton use in the home and community setting. Therefore, we ask ourselves the following question: is it possible to use an exoskeleton at home after a short training period in a hospital clinic? We screened our patient population and had 59 potential participants, of which we used 4 participants in the pilot study. And after short screening, we had 55 participants left. We had the following inclusion criteria: a motor complete spinal cord injury, a lesion between thoracic 1 and lumbar 1, at least 6 months after the injury, and no severe spasticity. The mass had to be below 3, and good range of motion of the hips and knees. And the participants had to have time and transport to the hospital for the training period. We finally enrolled 25 participants with a complete spinal cord injury. After inclusion, participants started with an 8-week training program, and the 8-week training program consisted of 3 sessions per week, resulting in a total number of 24 training sessions. A session at a duration of 1.5 hours. And after the final 8 weeks of training, participants performed a driver's license test. If they passed this exam, they used the exoskeleton at their home for 2 weeks. A prerequisite for performing the final skill test was that participants could control the remote control and walk without assistance of the exoskeleton trainer. During the 8 weeks of training, participants performed intermediate tests. They performed these tests at 2, 4, and 6 weeks. And it consisted of 27 skills. And they arranged into an order with increasing difficulty. So for standing, which is shown in this video, then it was walking, independent walking. And we also had 18 advanced skills, where they had to cross over a mat, stop on a sign. So it was of course more advanced. And the final skill test consisted of a fixed set of 20 skills and was performed 2 times. And they had to successfully complete 17 of those 20 skills. This figure shows on the x-axis the 3 intermediate skill tests, and on the y-axis the number of achieved skills. The red line indicates the number of skill tests for all participants, and the black lines indicates each individual. On average, we see, of course, an increase in number of skills over time, but the learning rate differs greatly between persons. In the first week, most participants were not able to walk independently, whereas there were 2 subjects, here on the top, who were already able to perform the most advanced skills. There are also some participants who do not increase their skill level during the training period, and they were not able to walk 10 meters without assistance, even not with assistance, those 2, for example. Because training is time consuming and the large difference between participants in learning to use an exoskeleton, we became interested in predictors of exoskeleton performance. Therefore, we performed an univariate and multivariate analysis on the 25 participants enrolled in the study. We included 9 potential predictors, which were lesion level, time since injury, age at injury, BMI, active lifestyle, anxiety, gender, and sports. The right table shows the included predictors and the explained variance of the model. After 2 weeks of training, lesion level, anxiety, and active lifestyle were the key factors that explained exoskeleton skill level. The lower the lesion level and the anxiety, the better skill level they had, and active lifestyle had a positive effect on skills level. Lesion level was also a predictor, but the only one for the second intermediate test. However, it did not influence the participants' final skill level. Physical health seems to be the most important towards the end of the training period. BMI, age, and active lifestyle were the predictors and explained about 66% of the skills level. To answer our main research question, if it's possible to use an exoskeleton at home after a short training period, we had to look at the final skills test. Of the 25 participants we enrolled, 21 completed the training. 15 of these 21 were able to perform the final skill test because they were able to walk independently with the exoskeleton, and 14 of them passed the exam. Therefore, we concluded that people with a complete spinal cord injury can be trained within a short training period to use an exoskeleton at home. Our next research question was the actual exoskeleton use at home after this training program. In other words, the last item of the thumb, the actual use. This figure shows the 14 participants. On the x-axis, the percentage of days they used the exoskeleton. On the y-axis, the number of steps they took when they had the exoskeleton at their disposal. On average, participants had the exoskeleton for 16.5 days. And in these 16.5 days, participants used the exoskeleton on average 9 days, which was 52% of the days. They took just above 6,000 number of steps, which is about 3 kilometers of distance. One person was very active and covered almost 15 kilometers, the one on the top. And there are also some participants on the left who minimally used the exoskeleton. The following factors were mentioned as reasons for non-use of the exoskeleton: the weather conditions, some storms, and a snowstorm. Becoming a father was one of those participants, and the dependence on a buddy availability. One person didn't have a buddy all the time. These factors can be seen as the facilitating conditions in the technology acceptance model. And one person mentioned as main reason that the exoskeleton did not meet the expectations of him. In total, they had 121 sessions, and the participants reported primary purpose of exoskeleton use as individual exercise. That was 74%, 90 out of 121 sessions. Other purposes of exoskeleton use were a combination of exercise and social events. Participation in social events, only 6%. Explore indoor usability, 4%, 5 sessions, or other. The location they used the exoskeleton was mostly outdoors. 58 of the 121, so almost 50%. And the remaining location of exoskeleton use was indoors, 25% in a gym or an indoor parking lot, 90% a combination of indoors and outdoors, and 6% at home. We also interviewed the participants after the training and the home use of the exoskeleton to have an idea what the perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use was. Satisfaction, they scored the exoskeleton with a 7+ on a scale of 0 to 10. So we considered this as a decent score. However, they mentioned several improvements. The first one is the weight of the exoskeleton. I didn't mention it, but we used the Rewalk exoskeleton, which is quite heavy, and it was not really easy to transport us. The effectiveness was also an important one. The ease of use, it was the main reason, make it easy to use it. And the safety was also mentioned as an item that should be improved. And it has to do with anxiety to fall. So after this research study, we also had a face-to-face semi-structured interview with 13 people with spinal cord injury who were experienced exoskeletal users to get a better idea how the future exoskeleton should look like. And 3 purposes came out of those. Again, the purposes I mentioned are the intended use of the exoskeleton in the beginning. And I would like to have some quotes of those participants. First one was the daily activities. Well, what I envision is a kind of an exoskeleton that I can put on like a pair of trousers and that I can wear sitting in my wheelchair, so that whenever I want to, I can get up or climb a flight of stairs or whatever. When I think of that, or what would be possible, a whole new world opens up. For the exercise, another quote for another person, also for health reasons, of course. Having walked for about 3.5 months, I felt even fitter. Just bladder and bowel goes easier, and when you walk and move your hips a few times a week, it feels more comfortable. That sounds a bit weird, but yes, that's what happens. And the last one is social interaction, it's also important, of course. I didn't want to think about that for a very long time. I told myself that it wasn't really important to me, but it's true that people really like to look at you at eye level, and they suddenly notice you again and say, hey, whoa, I haven't seen you standing up like this before. To optimize the future exoskeleton, different improvements were suggested. The experienced exoskeleton users mentioned that the future exoskeleton is easy to use, so that was the most important one. The next one was the small and lightweight and the tailor-made. And less important was the comfortable and safe, and it was less distinctive. And the most or the less important one was durable and affordable. So the most inner circle represent the desired improvements that was relevant for all purposes of use, for all participants, and the circles further to the edge represent improvements that are more person-independent or person-dependent or dependent of the purpose of use. So I would conclude with this slide, and I've added the important steps for the acceptance of the exoskeleton by the end users, the people with spinal cord injury. For now, the exoskeleton seems to be acceptable as an exercise device in the home and community setting. The perceived usefulness is high. Its ease of use for exercise purposes could be improved. The perceived usefulness of exoskeletons for social interaction is considered as good. And regarding the last purpose of the exoskeleton to prove daily functioning, we are not as far as the other 2 purposes. There are multiple areas of improvement. Important areas are the balance and the use of crutches to control the balance, and also the control of the exoskeleton. But others like donning, doffing, the effort you need use the exoskeleton, the transportability, all these factors are important for them. And I think only when a large number of these areas are improved, exoskeletons will become truly useful as a functional device in daily life for people with spinal cord injury. And I would like to thank you for the attention. And what I understood is that the questions and discussion will be after the other presenters.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Noel. As you say, any answers? I'm seeing that you are already writing some questions on the chat. So any questions you have during the presentation, please write on the chat at the end of the presentation. So there will be a round table and all the questions will be answered by the speakers. So the next speaker is Matteo Lancini, Assistant Professor in Mechanical and Thermal Measurement at the University of Brescia. And he will speak about measuring exoskeletons' performance, how to combine multiple measuring systems. So Matteo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will talk about how to combine different measuring systems. So it's something related to what we've just seen, but from a completely different perspective. The case study I will be presenting is concerning the measurement of exoskeleton performance, and that is made inside the EUROBENCH framework. I think most of you will already know the EUROBENCH framework. We will be talking about something that was developed for the Madrid facility where exoskeleton and other wearable robots are tested. In particular, what I'm interested in is test beds of all the benchmarking ecosystem. I'm focusing on the test bed, the protocols, and the benchmarks. If we look more closely to the definition of these three items, we see that test beds are environments plus measurement devices. If we think about what protocols are, experimental protocols, measurement protocols, one particular measurement protocols most of you are familiar with will come into mind, that is the kinematic protocol. And if we think of benchmarks, we see that they are metrics and ways to assess quantities. That is the actual definition of a measurement procedure. So what we're seeing here is a measurement system. So the idea is to approach the development of a benchmarking system by looking at it as a measurement system. I am applied metrology, so I'll try to focus on this perspective. One of the first rules of applied metrology is that you need to start from the end. You need to start from the result you want to show. What do you want to measure? In which form will you present your result? In our case, what we're interested in is looking at spinal cord injury pilots using exoskeleton and crutches, and in particular to understand the risks involved with the shoulder involvement. Because when these spinal cord injury subjects use exoskeleton with the crutches, they risk to overload the shoulder, and that could lead to shoulder pain and to other chronic pathologies. Moreover, as Noel told us, the control of the exoskeleton using the crutches is one of the usability issues that is also reported by the patients. So our measurand is the shoulder internal forces. We need to look more closely also to how we will present it. And a good practice to do that is to speak with who will actually use the data at the end. So we interviewed therapists and researchers, and what we came up with is a combination of 3 different things that are more complex than it actually seems. First of all, one of the main results that clinicians in particular are interested in is the peak value of the force for each side. Then most of therapists are interested in looking the average trend by gait cycle, so not in time, but correlated to the actual stride and gait cycle. And the third element is that they asked us to understand if the crutch is swinging or is standing on the ground. So those are the actual 3 components that we need to understand of our measurement. How can we obtain our aim? Well, for the gait phases, luckily for us, direct measurement is possible, so we can measure feet and ground contact. Right now, I'm not telling you how. I will be presenting it in a few seconds, but that is possible, so a direct measurement, if possible, is always preferable. For what concerns the internal forces, most of the times it's either impractical or illegal to disassemble a human being and put instruments inside. So what we need to do in biomechanics in particular is to use some kind of mechanical or biomechanical model, use inverse dynamics and inverse kinematics, and try to assess what is happening inside the body. In our case, we will have a simple mechanical model. And to provide data to this mechanical model, we will be needing the external forces. So the forces that are actually acting on our mechanical model. So the crutches will be a component, and the floor, so the ground floor reaction, will be a component as well. We'll need also to perform the inverse dynamics. We will need also the kinematics, so we'll need to measure also the kinematics. And to complete our assessments, we will also need to take into account the inertial property of all the bodies that are moving, or in our case, of all the segments that are moving. One of the first rule of measurement system is that we need to choose the simplest model possible. And I won't be going into detail, but the easiest way is to start from the simpler model. In this case, we started from a combination of planar models, and to add the contribution if and when they're needed. Remember that if you go for more complex model, you'll need to assess more parameters. And in my perspective as a measurement expert, more parameters means more tests, more subjects, or a more uncertain result. So we'll keep with the simplest solution. Our core measurement device is made up by the instrumented crutches, which provide a force measuring system, and IMU, so they will also provide the orientation during time, and a 3D depth camera to monitor the feet to understand if the feet is on the ground or not, so to assess the gait phases. Other measuring system we will be required to provide to our model are the ground reaction forces from the force platforms that we can see here. Will be the kinematics. We used a standard Vicon system with marker-based assessment. And to assess the inertial parameters, we used a combination of depth and color analysis to assess the mechanical properties of the subject body. This leads me to the core of the issue, that is how we combine multiple measuring systems. Taking into account that we need to have different manufacturers, this means that there won't be the same start and stop for every device. There will be no shared time-based. There will be different calibration procedures and different reference systems. This is made even worse in biomechanics because most of the time clinical practice is based on a single manufacturer solution. So these are closed solution, not particularly integrable with other solution. In our case, part of the instrumentation is custom made. This is common in research. And one of the bad things is that standards are not enforced. So we need to provide something new. In our example, we used kinematics from Vicon, fit ground reaction forces from BTS Bioengineering. Both those are commercial solutions. We developed the crutches on our own. In coordination with the University of Genoa, we developed the biomechanical model, and with the University of Trent, we developed the volume estimator. So for the right part of the slides, we at least add the possibility of coordinating between ourselves. On the left part, we did not. So we needed to employ different coordination strategies. First of all, we used internal coordination. Inside it, crutch, we have image analysis, IMUs, and load cells, so we need to understand how to combine those. Then we need to combine the right and the left crutch. And after we do that, we need to also integrate the force platforms, the motion capture, and the volume scanner. What we need to ask ourselves is if that can be made in real time or post-processing, if we need the whole complete time base to be shared, or we simply need the same start, and if the reference system is shared. For what concerns the crutches, that is quite simple, and it's the easier part, because the IMU and the load cell amplifier are on the same microprocessor, so we can have a shared time base. For what concerns the combination of the 3D camera and the force, we have different controllers, so we put one of the controllers on board of the crutches to perform synchronization. What we ended up is a solution like that. So we have 2 crutches with 2 systems on board that communicate between each other using wireless LAN and a ROS network. Obviously, on the ROS network, there should be a master device. So after a long discussion with all the participants of the ROS network, we developed this solution. What we need to do in this case, in the case of network coordination, is to define communication protocols. We have the master that starts the coordinator, the crutches coordinator that enables the crutch single controller that starts the camera, the IMU, and the load cell. So it seems simple, but there are at least 5 units that are working on this system. But there's a problem with the force platform, because the force platforms are, there's a problem with Vicon, because the Vicon cannot be run efficiently under ROS for synchronization, at least not in the time frame we work with. So the idea is to provide middleware. What we do is to have a single unit that triggers the Vicon system, records the timestamps, so the synchronization between the kinematics and the data from the crutches is performed ex post using the trigger timestamp. For what concerns instead the coordination with the force platforms, one solution we provided, we thought of, which is quite common also in biomechanics, if the system is not provided with a trigger, is to induce a common event, best if it's either impulsive or periodic, and then using a cross correlation of the signal, again ex post, we synchronize. Luckily for us, the coordination with the volume scanner was not required at all. Events are physically separated, so the only issue is that we need to remember that we need to store somewhere the subject ID. One note, in case of human subject, please ensure that the measurements are performed the same day, so we don't have any weight loss or gain in month. One other thing that we need to talk about is the geometrical reference system. In this case, we use the calibration wand. We put the calibration wand on the force plate, so we forced the reference system to coincide. One other solution that we used in the past using a markerless system is to use an approximate solution and use the average position in time of all joints and all markers to combine the direction. Last thing that we need to assess is uncertainty. Everything is uncertain. Every measurement comes with an assessment uncertainty. So what we need to do after collecting all this data is to assess the uncertainty of the devices using their datasheet and evaluate the uncertainty of the results by propagation, either using the GMU standard approach. You can find that in the norm, which is referenced here, or a Monte Carlo method. We are also preparing a paper on that. I did not put the reference here because it's under review right now, but please remind that uncertainty cannot be eliminated, only reduced. So try to simplify your model or to improve your device. Closing up, what will I suggest everybody that needs to combine different systems? Start from the measurement, choose your model, choose your measurement devices, think a lot about synchronization, use a common reference system, and then compute uncertainty. So that's more or less my speak for the day. I hope it was interesting. And if you have any questions, please write on the chat.
Okay, thank you very much, Matteo, for your presentation. Yeah, as Matteo says, in case you have any question, please write them on the chat, and at the end of the session, we will answer the questions. The next speaker is Gianluis Constanza. He's Chief Business and Clinical Officer at Wandercraft, and he will talk about the process of clinical trials in the context of bringing a product to the market. So please, Jan.
Thank you, Gabi. As an introduction, I'm not a clinical head of Wandercraft any longer, which is a good introduction because we defined 2 years ago that it was useful to have a full medical doctor in physiatry to be our clinical director, and that works very well. So trying to share my slides. Do you see them?
Yes, we can see them perfectly.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I will remember you or tell you what our exoskeleton design is because it's quite new, and then we'll go into clinical matters. The core of, we have heard a lot of crutches in the last presentations. The core of our technology is to bring an exoskeleton that's creating its own balance, so it's self-balanced and hands-free. And another core is that we have worked from day one with therapists to really learn from therapist experience to build, firstly, a rehabilitation tool, and secondly, a urban daily life oriented device that I'm going to tell you about but not show you yet. So we have started from the idea of hands-free locomotion, which led us to master a more complex architecture than what is seen on other exoskeletons as reworked that we have seen in the first presentation. with 12 degrees of freedom, and algorithms and artificial intelligence that are really complex, because you all know that emulating human walk is a difficult task. We have tried to make something that's completely intuitive to control. The basic is that the torso motion helps the device to detect the intent of the user. For high lesions or tetraplegic patients, we can put an IMU on the cat so that it can be replaced by head motion, or increasingly by voice control that we have fully tested, and that is very useful, and that we will introduce and CE mark and FDA approve next year. And the result is an exoskeleton that has a quite complete 3D motion potential. So it goes in straight lines, of course, it stand-up sits, but it also turns, controlled direction, performs side and back steps. You can crouch to grab an object on ground. I will show you all this. And increasingly, it uses 3D via stair slopes, etc. So the goal was to address clinical objectives. As I said, our first goal is to, and we're doing that right now, provide rehab hospitals with a tool that they find useful. So it allows gait training that's hands-free for now a wide array of patients, medullary lesions, stroke patients, TBI, neuromuscular pathologies, etc. One key observation of therapists is that it allows a very high dose because the limitations of other technologies have been raised, and very early in the pathology, in the acute phase, for example, as early as doctors decide it's possible to use, which therapists find very useful. It allows completely passive gait for complete paraplegic patients, for example, but it has a mode where the device guesses what is the residual motricity of the patient, and then the device will complement what the patient is capable of giving in the training session, and the physiotherapist can set that to the level she decides that it's more useful for the patient. We have a toolbox of tasks that I will evoke, and we have designed it to be operated by one person. For example, its indication allows an assistant physio or an exercise physio, etc. And the doffing is very short, but more importantly, as it's intuitive in design, we observe that patients are trained during the first session, and then they improve. But the basic motion and using of the exo is learned in the first session, so it's very small. And the video shows some of that with T8 or T10 paraplegic patient standing up and walking. And as I've forgotten to switch the video on, I will advance fast. There are two basic modes, but they are fully set by the physio. There is a real gait mode where we design a walk pattern that's as close to physiological walk as possible. And here with this stroke patient, it's early gait, another mode which is slower but easier for an acute patient in early phases of training. Going fast on this one. Now the EXO has been in research for some time in hospitals in France and the US, and now it's being distributed since last year. And now that the pandemic is going slower, we have actually a very strong traction with hospitals. So we are starting to build and distribute quite a lot of exoskeletons. Here it's in a Paris hospital, the first day of use with the first patient. And when I'm trying here to illustrate the fact that we have really worked with literature and therapists. On the right-hand side, we love this graph from paper from Alberto Esquenazzi with whom we are working a lot, and showing the use of robotics in terms of therapy goal on the vertical axis and rehabilitation phase. And we've been trying to design a tool that's usable at all steps and relevant for each therapy goal, and design the feature along these therapeutic objectives. Now for clinical trials, we have a lot of specificities, but 5 of them are here. The main risk is falling. There are no crutches, and the more the patient improves, the less the physio will intervene. So today we have solved it with a cable. As you can see, the cable is loose. It doesn't hold the exo, but it will interact in case of fall, and prevent the patient and the exo from falling. This is a regulatory shortcut, I would say. Now we're, as you will see in the next videos, we're working with without a cable, which forces us to develop even more improved balance, particularly for the personal version that we're developing currently. But it's a thing to take into account in any sort of clinical research at the moment. Another thing that we're discovering is that we are entering into a more realistic locomotion, meaning that, and the current trials seem to open the way to unexpected outcomes. So this is a key clinical entry into designing a research project. The fact that you can have active verticalization at high doses, because, for example, you have no constraint of learning, or you have no constraint, no constraint on the upper limbs, means that you can address comorbidities probably in a wider range and impact. Now, as we are getting closer to daily life, one point to take into account is to manage patient expectations. So we're recommending our medical teams to be very careful with patients, telling them that a personal version is not ready yet, and considering that after they have done things of daily life, they will still for a few years get back in their wheelchairs. And the fact that we are starting to show to medical teams the design of the personal exoskeleton engages into a change in the therapist paradigm in the goals of their jobs, I would say. Yeah, clinical plan. So I will go very quickly, because the clinical plan we have is quite typical for medical devices. We start with pilot tests. That was 4 years ago, just trying the device on patients and working on safety, checking safety, and then performance to get into CE mark and currently FDA approval. And I will expand on that, we have used use cases with medical teams a lot. We encourage our medical teams to develop one patient case studies which enlight the possible research that we are going to do starting now on how we improve rehab, how we can help therapists to make better gait relearning, and provide treatment care for comorbidities, etc. That's where we are today. And there will be a phase where we probably will help therapists discover new treatments. And obviously, the more you go into that plan, the more engaged are the medical teams working with us. The last phase, or not the last phase, but the next phase will be to test clinically a personal exoskeleton that will be much lighter. Actually, the current prototype sits in a not an active narrow wheelchair, but in a regular wheelchair, or in a train seat, or in a car seat, to give you an example. Just an example of use cases. We like use cases a lot. 2 examples actually. This patient is a great patient. He had a very complex tetraplegia, tetraparesis from ischemic stroke, and it was very difficult to continue care with him. The physios and doctors told us that he really was in an impasse, lost motivation, did not know how to progress, and the exo led him to restart gait training, and of course needing to be confirmed in wider studies, but obtaining patient re-engagement and improvement in locomotion capability. The details are below, and I will welcome your questions. In a more typical case, this patient was also very interesting. He is a paraparetic patient with very little leg motricity, as you can see. And the interesting thing is that he's a sports person, so he helped the therapeutical team to develop things like basketball, tennis, etc. Things that you can't do when you are not hands-free, obviously. And the team observed functional improvement, believing that it's due to a combination of intensity of dose and improvements also in the torso functional parameters. And again, of course, this is a one patient case study, so it's only here to open the door to to wider research. Okay, I can go back to that on question. Internal competencies, building internal competencies for industry players is essential, mostly to establish a relevant link between engineers and physios, doctors, occupational therapists. This is key. And then it's also important to build these competencies for a company like ourselves, that we did. And that's why I'm not the clinical director of the company, which I'm very happy not to be. To conclude, this video shows the preparation of a Japanese competition. Basically, Kevin, our test pilot here, as I said, he's a complete paraplegic person at T8. Performs most of the in-home daily life activities. So you see no cable. We have improved stability. It is still the big rehab hospital device, but it's the base to develop the algorithms for a faster and much slimmer, and I would say more beautiful, a personal exoskeleton that's also designed to be more affordable. So we are, besides what you see on this video, we are currently starting to develop the whole pathway of a person that wants to have a regular daily life. And the clinical testing of that will be quite interesting, because regulators or clinical teams don't really have a reference for a near non-disabled person life pathway on a daily basis. So we are going to design them with them. I'm not showing the video here. We also perform tests in the street, but that's quite specific. You will be interested to know that two of us, the three founders of the company, have close relatives that are in wheelchair. In my case, it's my son, and Nicolas on the right-hand side, it's his brother. And his brother may sometime be our test pilot for street tests. And this street test will be quite unique in terms of clinical trials, and that will start next year for those who are interested. And I welcome questions on Wandercraft and our great clinical teams and patients in the test, in the question part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jan-Luis.
Sardinia?
Jan, are you there?
Trying to jump in, yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. You saved me.
Okay,
you.
then I take over from here.
So the floor is yours, Jan, for the question and answer, if you can.
Yes, so I would like to say a few things. So good morning, and my apologies for my connection problems. Big thank you to Sandra and Garbine for jumping in a professional way. I had to move to a different environment, and it's a bit here, but I hope that doesn't bother you too much. Also from my side and from also the cost action on wearable robots and from EUROBENCH, I would like also to welcome again speakers and audience. Just a few words on that, as you know, but maybe you just jumped into this webinar. So I would like to say that COST is a European-funded institute that promotes through their actions collaboration in science and technology. And EUROBENCH is also a European consortium that helps forward the benchmarking technologies and experiments of bipedal robots. And both projects are funded by the European Horizon 2020 program. And I would also like to say that we are very happy that in these difficult COVID times, where it's really difficult to bring people together in person, that we were able to set up together this series of webinars. As both projects put a lot of emphasis on determining and measuring the use of technology in real all-day life practice, I think presentations were really great examples of such work. And I would like to thank again our speakers for their contributions. And for the sake of time, I will now proceed with the interaction session. We have 20 minutes. I will take the questions that were asked in the chat as a starting point, but I would also like to invite the speakers to jump in and make the discussion also a bit more interactive. But starting with the questions in the order that they were posed. First, there was a question to Noël. If you investigated the differences between outdoor and indoor usage. You can react to that?
Yes, and I just shared my screen, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah. Maybe missed it in the presentation, but there is a difference between indoors and outdoor use. What we saw is that they mainly use it outdoors. And when they use it indoors, it was in an indoor at a location, for example, a parking lot or a gym, where they had a nice surface where they could walk over easily with the exoskeleton. And the really in-home usage, that was minimally only one subject or two subjects tried it once to see how they could perform in their homes, but they were quite disappointed regarding that. So it's mainly that they were looking for a place where they had a flat surface, and that could be indoors. If they had a large house, that would be possible, but that's mostly not the case, of course, and that's why they moved mostly to indoor locations, parking lots, gyms, to walk with the exoskeleton. So more kind of an individual training or training with people around.
Then maybe say that it's also an interaction between what people want to do and what they can do with an exoskeleton.
Yeah, I think that's the important part. I mean, most said they really liked it that they could walk with somebody else. So to have a buddy around, they needed, of course, to have a buddy around to walk with the exoskeleton. It was already kind of a social interaction that they asked friends or that they could walk with them. But for these 2 weeks, it was more like an individual training. How well am I performing when I'm using the exoskeleton or walking in the exoskeleton?
Did you give any
Matteo,
feedback to the? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Did you give any feedback to the patient during the training?
During the training, they got a lot of feedback, of course. The training was completely focused on that they were able to walk with the exoskeleton independently. And they received the feedback like, okay, try to switch from your, move your, in a rhythm with the crutches and move your body at the right position. So transferring the weight from one to the other one. So they got a lot of information. And the first participants we had in our study, I mean, therefore we had a kind of a pilot with 4 participants, and we also saw a quite learning curve in the physiotherapists. So in the beginning, they didn't have any good idea what they had to remark or how they had to coach the participants. So that improved during the study, actually. And it might also have influenced the skills level gained by each subject, but I think it leveled out around 10th participant.
Thank you. Jean-Louis, would you like to add something on this topic of, let's say, indoor use versus outdoor use?
Well, we not surprisingly, we have worked with a lot of patients for many years, and we go on and we increase working with patients to understand what they need, in fact, and of course with the help of therapists and aiding persons. It's quite balanced, but I would say that more than half persons would be looking for a device that allows them simply to perform an ordinary life. Some of them, a majority, have a job or have a good level of inclusion in society. Some others would like to improve their inclusion level, which means that we have to solve the self-balance issue and the related functionalities to perform what is basic, like as it was said, looking at interacting with other people at eye level is very important. But other things such as using toilets or stepping in and out of a car, which is a favorite means of transportation for persons in wheelchairs in most countries. That's the must-haves. And then the required or highly desired is to have to be able to go out and go to work or get the kids from school or go shopping or stay at home and do stuff without planning. How will I do that? And can I do it? And will I be able to go home? Will my hands and wrists be tired? It's raining, etc. And planning is one of the huge issues for persons in wheelchair. That's not the only one, of course. So we have arrived to a sort of path that we are developing the exoskeleton on, that we believe would gather quite a lot of persons who can't actually interact with their communities out of a wheelchair. I can expand on that, of course, but it's not too extreme in terms of functionalities, but it really requires an exoskeleton, as it was said, that is much lighter than the one you have seen on the video, and that's what we're doing. So basically 5 to 6 centimeters around the hips, to be very specific. And that can sit comfortably in the front seat of a car, to give you an idea. That's not the only, or go to use the toilets is a good one. Non-adapted, non-accessible toilets. And 2, that is safe, doing basic functionalities and walking on reasonably irregular ground that can be wet. This gives you a sort of envelope of what we believe people are looking for, and that will be ready in not that many years, because we are going to start clinical testings probably by the end of 22. And we're not public about these dates. We've been very careful in all our development not to over-communicate to patients so that they don't develop too early expectations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important to see that perspective and to see the difference between a system that is mainly used to do a daily exercise or a regular exercise, or really be an assistive device in all their life. I think that's already very visible from this different perspective.
I think the two should converge. Our observation with medical teams and with the rehab exo that we're having today is that therapists find a great deal of interest of having even limited daily life tasks to introduce, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm talking with a lot of humility, but to introduce task-oriented training early into the gait relearning process. So there is a convergence between both. at some point.
Yeah, thanks for that addition. I think that makes a lot of sense. To proceed with a specific question to Matteo, Christine Bream was asking for the model that you used in your inverse dynamics, how many segments for the upper extremities did you use, or what assumptions did you use?
Well, I'll just show you an actual video of the segments we're using. We are using 4 segments per limb for what concerns the upper limb. It's the crutches, the forearm, the upper arm, and the shoulder. So this is more or less the simplified system we are using. You need to think that for each segment that you're seeing, we also extracted the volume and the mass and inertia information from the actual measurement of the subject. So we scanned the subject with the 3D system, and we isolated the external surface of the body, and then we assessed the inertial properties. In our previous model, the crutches were linked to the forearm, since in most cases, especially with the walk, the forearm and the crutches are a rigid element. But the next model we're working on is with the actual wrist working. So the hand is connected to the crutches and not the whole forearm.
Thank you for your elaboration. If there are more questions, feel free to type them in the chat, of course. Related to what Noel just was asking, so the possibility of putting on an exoskeleton all on your own. I was wondering, Noel, was that something that you trained, or did you train the caregiver in your study?
Sorry, Jan, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I was asking about the process of putting the system on, and whether a patient could do that himself or herself, or support it, or were you training also the caregiver?
Yeah, that was actually part of the training session, and it was of course not in the first part. We started always with just standing and then keeping balance doing standing. But when people were able to walk and we had the idea that they could use it at home, then they also get the instructions how they could don the exoskeleton by themselves, and also doing off, of course. And it was quite easy to do, and they were able to do it within 5 to 10 minutes. Actually, it was also my question to Jean-Louis, if they were able to don the Wandercraft by the patient themselves, or that they need a physiotherapist to help them.
Yeah, in the video that you see in the apartment, if you remember, our test pilot is donning himself and doffing himself. We have a lot of therapists that use self-donning and doffing, and actually the patient taking over the whole training session, including donning and doffing, as a therapeutical objective to get a better engagement from the patient. And patients usually would race against each other. So the record for doffing is 11 seconds, and for donning it's around 1 minute, I would say. So it's quite easy. For the personal version, we will have a lot of self-operated braces and attachments, body to exo interfaces.
And the sit to stand transfer, Jean-Louis, because I saw in the video that still the therapist was behind the participant or the subject. They don't need anybody around?
No, it's completely autonomous, and the therapist would help usually beginning patients to feel balanced. But again, I will transfer you the video with Kevin, but you can see, I will send the link. It's fully autonomous, and you don't need any longer arms on the chair. You just lean forward, and the exo understands you want to stand up, and it stands up. And same for sitting, you lean forward, and if you're in the sitting mode, it's sitting down on any chair. For having lunch, you have seen that we have introduced these little functionalities. That's quite funny. You're sitting down on a seat, and then the exo can extend the legs and drag you in front, pretty much like a non-disabled person would do, to drag you ahead, to have you sitting close to the table, to not to overextend your arms to have lunch. This was brought by a constraint by this Japanese competition we were doing. So it's only software, so you can do pretty much whatever you want with 12 degrees of freedom.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Noël, there was also a question to you from Anne-Marie Hughes. What are the next steps, or how are you developing further this research?
What we would like to do, I mean, now the participants had the exoskeleton at their disposal for about 2 weeks. We were also wondering if they have it for a longer time. Are they still able, or are they still using it that much as they were used in the 2 weeks? We have the experience with 2 persons who have the exoskeleton or who bought the exoskeleton, and we saw that at a certain point they have difficulty, like we might have difficulty to do our sports. They have the difficulty to go to exercise with the exoskeleton, and they call it exercise or to walk with the exoskeleton. For example, Ruben, which I showed you in the beginning, he has at a certain point he just had it at the gym, and he went to the gym and started walking there as an exercise. So that was important for him. So they have kind of difficulty to continue with using the exoskeleton, even they have health benefits from it. It's comparable like sports. But regarding the other steps, we think that there's still a lot of improvement needed for the exoskeletons. And together with the University of Twente, we test and develop new things. The first one is what we think is that if you have an exoskeleton in which you can stand without the use of crutches and you can still easily walk, like the Wandercraft, that would be a step forward, of course. Then you can walk to a certain place and then stop standing and use your arms freely. We also are investigating the fiber tactile feedback, because you don't have any information of your legs. Where are your legs during your walking? You might have some additional information. You have additional information as you use fiber tactile information, and you can train easier to use the exoskeleton. And of course, the ultimate goal is a light-weighted, self-controlling, stable walking exoskeleton. But hopefully we will be there within 5 years, or even earlier, as Jean-Louis mentioned. Which is, of course, I mean that. Sorry.
I'll continue. Sorry, I didn't need to interrupt.
Yeah, I mean, and the important one is, of course, light-weighted. And also what Jean-Louis mentioned, many of our participants mentioned that they really would like to have it just sitting in the car, that they are sitting in the car with the exoskeleton and that they can get out of the car without donning the exoskeleton within 5 minutes or getting a wheelchair. That would be a really nice next step. And then it becomes a functional device or kind of an assistive device.
Thank you for this perspective. I have one more question for Matteo. You have now constructed a very nice and complex measurement system, and you measure the shoulder load, which is very important with the current generation of exoskeletons. but are you also considering of measuring other parameters in the future with your measurement system?
Well, the first thing that we want to work on is taking our measurement system outside, because most of the time when we work with spinal cord injury subject, outdoor practice is different at indoor practice. So the idea was to provide gait phase information, and that's what the cameras are for, outside the lab. So when we tried the detection of the gait phases in grass, sand, gravel, and right now results are promising. So we can actually follow this line, and yes, we also are working on comparing training performance. So if you work from parallel bars with the exoskeleton, walking assistance with the exoskeleton, then crutches with the exoskeleton, then exoskeleton with no crutches, you can follow up the forces on the shoulders. One important thing that we would like to work on, and that we are working on, is providing virtual reality feedback to the users. In this case, we're focusing more on the therapist and the subject. We don't want to overload the subject, the pilot, with information. So we're providing the therapist with information on the kinematics and the forces. And one other thing that we are working on, again, our aim is to bring everything outdoor, is to have markerless systems to assess the interaction between the exoskeleton and the subject. So we're kind of moving towards that part.
Yes, thank you. Very clear. With these outlooks on the future, I think we should conclude the session. I would like to thank again very much our speakers, Jean-Louis Constanza from Wandercraft, Matteo Lancini from the University of Brescia, and Noël Keijsers from the Sint Maartenskliniek. Thank you very much for your discussion and your contributions. And thanks to the audience for listening and participating with questions. And Sandra and Garbiñe, thanks a lot for stepping in last minute and to deal with my technical difficulties. So, yeah, with that, I would like to end the session and announce already that there will be a final session in September on regulatory and standardization topics. But this will be announced in due time. Wishing you all a very good day and I hope to see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.